Welcome in.
Let's get to work.
The fastest growing sports spectacular. It's the Big E Sports Show. Your 1 hour comprehensive expose of all things in the sports universe. With a focus on some of the biggest sports icons on the planet. Now, here's your host, the one and only award-winning Elissa Walker Campbell.
Hey, Elissa Walker Campbell, welcome back to the Big E Sports Show as we continue to take a deep dive into the world of basketball. March Madness is underway, but right now we're going to focus our attention on the NBA, and so honored to have a very special guest joining us. He is a veteran NBA journalist with over 25 years experience who has covered some of the most pivotal moments in league's history. True pleasure to have with us, and that is Howard Beck. How are you, Howard?
Hey, listen, I'm doing really well. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. This is certainly a special time of the year, and we're looking forward to taking a deep dive on some NBA storylines. But you got to give us a quick hit. What are your early takeaways from the men's NCAA tournament, and how's that bracket looking?
I am quite possibly the worst person to ask this because I don't do brackets, and I barely watch the tournament. I know I'm not supposed to admit that as a basketball writer, but I'm solely focused on the NBA, and I'm kind of the mindset of I will learn the guys I need to learn when we get closer to the draft, but I'm so immersed in the NBA, I don't really feel like I have time to get into the tournament. So my apologies, that's bad radio.
It's all good, but listen, one guy you've got to weigh in on, Howard, is Rick Pitino's return. I mean, he certainly has made a notable comeback with St. John, and just what an incredible legacy that Rick Pitino has had in the game of basketball, whether it's the NBA or college.
Yeah, and that's in my backyard, of course, here in New York. Incredible. I mean, I think people probably had written off, Rick Pitino as a force in basketball at either level, any level, multiple times. I think he went to Greece at one point to continue his coaching career.
He did.
Not so long ago, if I recall. So yeah, absolutely incredible, and it's a dual comeback. It's not just him, but it's the St. John's program, which hasn't been all that relevant for quite a while too. So, one of the many fun storylines in the tournament that I am not paying as much attention to as I'm supposed to.
Well, listen, we're going to move ahead and let's talk some NBA, because certainly a significant development and one of the biggest headlines this past week was the Celtics agreement, record-breaking $6.1 billion sale. So your thoughts on this new benchmark for the highest purchase price of a sports team in the U.S.? Because, Howard, I mean, what a significant milestone. That's huge.
Incredible in part too, because this has been a season where we've heard a lot of hand wringing about the NBA and the ratings.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is an incredible vote of confidence in the NBA's future when you're paying a record sum for one of the franchises. Now, granted, it is one of the marquee franchises, one of the most storied franchises, but it's also one that does not own its arena, does not own and run a WNBA team. And so it's just the valuation we're talking about is strictly for the Celtics franchise itself. And that $6.1 billion, as I understand it, could actually reach closer to $7.3 billion when all is said and done, based on some folks I talked to yesterday. What's happening is, the new owner, the new proposed owner, and he has to be approved by the Board of Governors, but Bill Chisholm, his group is going to buy 51%. That's the first payment. And then a few years down the road, they will pay the rest of it. And Wick Grossbeck, the current owner, will then hand off control at that time. But there are escalator clauses built in so that in the 3-year span that they're waiting to pay the next payment, the valuation is expected to keep increasing. And so based on that, this could be $7.3 billion. And so yes, even at 6.1, it would be the most for any sports franchise in North America. At 7.3, certainly so. And it makes you wonder where the end is. There any end in sight to how high these franchise valuations can go in the NBA? I think the other piece of it on the basketball side is just now the curiosity of how Bill Chisholm, again, assuming he is approved as the new owner, how he'll approach this. He is a Massachusetts native. He called himself a diehard Celtics fan since childhood. And there's a huge responsibility, not just owning the Celtics because of their history, but because they're literally the defending champions and have one of the most talented rosters in the league and should be contenders for several years to come here. but you have to be willing to keep spending at the level that they have been under the previous owners, which involves hundreds of millions in luxury tax payments and, a lot of other considerations that go with that. So that's what I'm really curious about. If and when he's approved as the owner, how is he going to approach this and try to sustain what they're doing?
Howard, I want to discuss the implications, what this means for the NBA, because one would think that this sale sets a new benchmark for NBA team valuations, and owners may view this as, perhaps an opportunity to reassess the worth of their teams, potentially leading to more sales and investments. I mean, what say you?
We've already seen some of this, Elissa. Like we saw Mark Cuban sell within the last, year and a half. We saw Mark Lasry, who was one of the primary owners in Milwaukee, sell his share of the Bucks. And I think part of it is because these guys are seeing where the valuations are right now and cashing out. Mark Lasry's also been talked about and reported as being somebody who might buy an expansion team, so he may have just gotten out temporarily. But will others want to sell at this point? I mean, I am curious about that too. I don't know that there's any rush to do it, but to the extent that you might believe, not you, but any of us might believe that there's a bubble in effect here, and maybe there is. Again, I don't know how many billionaires there are in the world who have the means to buy it. At some point, you think we're going to hit a limit here. And if you look at it that way, then I could see where some teams might say, you know what, this is the time to get out. Cash out when things are high before there's some sort of market correction or whatever may come to pass. The other thing that's interesting about it from the NBA standpoint, the NBA has to be thrilled. The league office has to be absolutely thrilled. The other owners have to be absolutely thrilled, because with the Celtics selling in this $6 to $7 billion range, it means that if and when the NBA expands, and we've talked a lot about expansion in recent years around the league, they're going to now charge or expect $6 billion minimum from each of those two new franchises, whether it's Seattle and Vegas or wherever it may be. And so that's great for the league too, because that money is then split by the existing owners, and it helps offset the fact that they're now going to be splitting up their, the rest of the pie, the TV revenue, chiefly 32 ways instead of 30. So getting a high price for the buy-in is critical.
As we talk about the Celtics and this benchmark, the highest purchase price of a sports team, I'm a little perplexed because we've heard so much about this narrative that's been floating around, Howard, that the NBA ratings, that they're down. So was this crisis? Is that an overblown story? Is it hyperbole? What is it?
Oh, yeah, I think it's very much overblown. The fact is that the NBA also just signed a new national media rights deal with, ESPN, Amazon, and NBC, that tripled the value of their previous national TV rights deal. It was for 76 billion or so over the next, I think, decade. So clearly the NBA is still a really valuable commodity. Else they would not be spending 75 billion combined to get those rights over the next decade. The ratings were down pretty sharply in the early weeks of the season, and it created a little bit of that narrative that just kind of fed on itself. But what happened was there was some correction, or not correction. There was the ratings kind of rebounded starting in like mid to late December, and have since then. The ratings are still I think they're down slightly from last season, but it's not some dramatic dip. I think people overreacted to some early data from the first month of the season. That happens. But the league's in pretty great shape. I mean, I think if I were going to raise any concerns about the league going forward, it's more that, Steph Curry and LeBron James have been the standard bearers for so long now that we've almost taken them for granted. They're still playing at a really high level. The Warriors and Lakers are back in the thick of things in the Western Conference, but those guys are very, very, very close to the end. It's coming. And to me, as I look across the league, there's a lot of great talent. There's some really incredible players, some really exciting players, but none of them quite have that same magnetism or that same draw that Steph and LeBron have. And someone's going to have to, or several someones are going to have to become that standard bearer. And because that's what drives ratings and interest ultimately. You've got to have somebody who's kind of the focal point. We had, Magic and Bird. We had Jordan. We had Shaq and Kobe. We've had LeBron and Steph for 15 years, or in LeBron's case, 22 years. I don't know who carries that forward. And I do think somebody needs to, And it has to happen organically. The league can't just manufacture a new face of the league. It has to happen organically, and we'll see.
Well, let's talk about and shift gears here a bit. Let's talk about how the NBA has been contemplating expansions. Several cities that have emerged as strong candidates. Who's at the top of your list? I believe you mentioned Seattle. They're an NBA ready city?
It's interesting because the NBA literally has not started the expansion process. We in the media and fans have all been talking about it for years already.
Oh, yeah.
And there's been an expectation that they're going to discuss it sometime soon. They were going to wait until the new CBA was done, and they were going to wait until the new media rights deal is done. Those things are done. And now the Celtics sale is done. So that should clear the path for them to start a process to actually start accepting bids and evaluating those bids. And Seattle and Vegas are the two cities that are most often spoken about because Seattle, of course, lost the Sonics when that team was moved to Oklahoma all those years ago. And Las Vegas, which, was once a place that the league didn't want to have anything to do with, is now like their second home. They have the summer league there. They have all kinds of events there. Their NBA Cup is now played there. It's a very strong NBA market potentially as well. So those are considered like the de facto leaders. But there are other places, Adam Silver would love to have a team in Mexico City someday, probably not imminent or not the next round, but like that is something the league has contemplated. Kansas City, I think there are a few other places around the country that are probably going to get involved, but we'll just have to see how those ownership groups form and where they want to bid on behalf of. But I think we'd all be shocked. Assuming expansion happens, I think we'd all be shocked if it wasn't ultimately Vegas and Seattle.
Yeah. Hey, we are winding down our time. Howard, we want to have you weigh in on who is best positioned for a deep playoff run because the countdown's on. I mean, the playoffs are going to be here before you know it. I know you're fired up.
Yeah, and we've got a pretty great race. Although it's gotten a little smaller than it was earlier in the season. I think it's pretty much down to like Cleveland and Boston in the East. And Oklahoma City is almost standing alone in the West, which is not to say that that's, a fait accompli. The Thunder are a young team. They've won exactly one playoff series with this group, but they're super talented. They have a huge lead in the West. Can the Nuggets or the Lakers or the Warriors or the Grizzlies, somebody else knock them out? We'll see. But the Thunder, it's kind of the Thunder's to lose in the West. Cleveland's having an incredible season. It feels like it's the Cavs and Celtics in the East. I'm not sure anyone else gets involved, but it's going to be a great race. I'm looking forward to these playoffs.
Who do you think has done the best job coaching so far this season?
The Coach of the Year race is fun in itself because for the longest time, Kenny Atkinson with Cleveland was the clear front runner, but the Pistons have done such a great revival this season that JB Bickerstaff is in this conversation as well. And of course, JB Bickerstaff was fired by the Cavaliers last summer before they hired Kenny Atkinson. And so you've got, the guy who was fired by Cleveland and the guy currently coaching Cleveland are the two favorites now for Coach of the Year. Fortunately, ballots are not due for several weeks still. I don't know which way I'll go there, but I think that's a two-person race. Hey,
good stuff. Always a true pleasure to have the opportunity to catch up with NBA national columnist, and that is the great Howard Beck. Thank you, Howard, for stopping by.
Thanks, Elissa. Appreciate it.
You bet.